Hi class, today we're going to consider some of the political, economic, and foreign policy issues that our nation faced right after the American Revolution, and that will have us make that decision about whether or not to keep the Articles or to create another form of government. So we know how this ends, right? We have the Constitution, but how did we necessarily make that decision to have a meeting in order to get there? This time period is sometimes called the critical period, because our nation really is at a critical moment of its very early existence. We could either succeed or we could easily fall apart, because truthfully, we really weren't whole yet as an entire country. There was an economic crisis at home, as well as even in one's personal home. So many farmers are going to be losing, they will be losing their lands because of the debt they owed. There's an overall disillusionment about the war. Things don't necessarily improve for so many people after the war. And there is a struggle for credibility at home with our new government as well as abroad. So let's look at some of the political weaknesses. Right, remember that most of these stem from the first government we have, which is the Articles of Confederation. They were purposely designed to establish a weak federal government because our states were very nervous about having a strong central government, considering we just got rid of one. So they wanted to make sure that the federal government had very little control over what the state governments could do. So for instance, that as a federal government, we could not regulate state trade, or we could not enforce the payment of taxes. And if we don't have taxes, that means that we cannot pay down the war debt, and that was going to lead to a whole host of foreign policy issues. The Articles were first designed to simply control diplomacy, but to print money, and to settle disputes among the states, and of course to handle the war effort as the war was still on. But truthfully, it overall did not have that ability to unify the states and to always work together even after the war is going to be over. The Articles were also designed to give more power to the states, thereby there was no executive or even a judicial branch of government. So Congress was a single body, and that small states had the same influence over Congress as the larger states. So one state, one vote rule, which is going to favor the small states over the big states, and you know that's going to be a discussing point when we get to the Constitutional Convention. Amending the Articles was going to require every state to approve that amendment, which you know is going to be next to impossible, and any bills that needed to be passed needed 9 of the 13 states in order to support that bill. The one thing that you could say the Articles will see some success with is all the land that we get after the war with Britain. So the one map there is showing you all of the territory that is gained with that Treaty of Paris, and how many states are going to claim so much territory that they're not even connected to. If you look at the one map, you see that most of Illinois was going to be claimed by the state of New York, and that the entire state of Georgia was probably going to triple in size. So we know that was going to be very contentious. So the one positive that comes out of this is that the Articles will be successful in settling the dispute over who will own the Western lands. So not that this is a bad thing, this is a good thing that will happen. So this is not necessarily a problem, but you do want to highlight this huge achievement here, because not only is it going to settle this ongoing dispute between states, but it's also going to generate funds for this new country, because under the Northwest Ordinance, the states, the land that is going to be turned over to the federal government can be purchased by settlers, and that is going to generate funds for the federal government, which is so very key. We talked more about this in class. I'm not going over all the details, but just to highlight that this is a strength of the Articles. All right, economic problems. There's a few of those as well. Each state borrowed heavily during the war. Some states were able to pay off those debts within probably under 10 years, where other states are going to be burdened with that state debt for quite some time. Many citizens are in far worse financial shape after the war, especially so many of the farmers that spent 2, 3, 4 years at war, depending on how long they were gone for, and they come home to find that they haven't paid their taxes on that farm. So very quickly they are going to get into debt. Markets are going to be flooded with so many of the British-made goods. Even though we have very infant industries developing, we cannot compete with the cheaper made British goods. So, cost is always going to be driven by the cheapest price, and therefore so many of these very infant American industries are just unable to compete. Overall, the country had very little credit with foreign lenders. We weren't a very reliable source. We hadn't started to pay back the loans from the war. How could we expect to get any money further? And states also taxed each other on any goods that they happen to trade with one another. So then that goes back to the articles, is that the federal government had really no control over this. Even though they were going to have to settle disputes over it, they have no say over this. So states are going to charge each other, and that is going to hurt that relationship with your neighboring state, as well as it's not going to help for national unity. States are going to start making their own currency, which again, not everybody's going to recognize, and they're just really printing paper money that has no value, and that is not going to help the economic crisis. Right, foreign relation tensions. All right, as you can probably imagine, all right, we don't have the best relationship with old Mother Britain. We're going to have a very rough start at a very strong relationship, which of course we have today. But it's going to take probably about a good 100 years before we can say that we have a better relationship with them. At first, they are going to refuse to send a minister to our new country. We are considered, again, second class, and they don't believe that we have earned that right to have a minister. They also are going to refuse to trade with us in the Caribbean territories, which again, areas that we were so crucial with trading in terms of smuggling. Now we don't have access to those ports anymore, and that will make it far more difficult to pay back any of our loans if we are not trading. They are going to refuse to make any commercial treaties with us. Again, how can you expand your trade if you're not allowed to trade with one of the biggest empires in the world at the time? They also are going to refuse to leave the key trading posts and forts that are in the Northwest Territory. This is land that they turned over to us under the Treaty of Paris, and they are refusing to leave it. Their goals are well, there's two or three really, two I've mentioned. One is to keep the natives on the sides of the British, so that any American colonists that are trying to start a new life in this territory, you are going to be harassed by these Native Americans. They also want to protect the fur trade that they have established with the Native Americans, and that if the Americans are encroaching in on that, the British are going to lose out. They're also going to use the argument that the Americans had not honored their war debts. So until we pay back that debt, they felt they had the right to stay in those forts. Now, that is going to change, but it's going to take about 10 years before the British to finally leave, because there really was no need to. There was no military forcing them out. So then this will finally take place in 1796. The picture there is obviously from an artist's rendition of what's called the Battle of Fallen Timbers. President Washington is going to assign General Mad Anthony Wayne to head out to what today we call Toledo, Ohio, in order to reclaim the fort that was there controlled by the British. So before we actually get to the British fort, the American forces are going to meet a compilation of the Native American troops near what's called Fort Miami, and we will successfully defeat the Native Americans, and thereby that kind of forces the British out of Fort Miami as well as Fort Detroit, and they will also eventually have to leave Fort Mackinac, which is way up there in the UP, part of Michigan. But you can see how this would be a problem if you have the British stationed throughout the Northwest Territory, how are American settlers supposed to go further west if they could possibly be harassed not just by the Native Americans but also by the British? All right, more tension with Spain. Spain controlled the mouth of the Mississippi River and all of that surrounding territory. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but we need that river. That is the major north and south highway. So if any of our men and women are heading out west and they are setting up a farm and they want to bring their farm products into market, they're going to need to use that Mississippi River. And if we don't have access to that river, there will be really no reason to head out further west. Spain also claimed additional land in part of the southeast region, land that was supposed to be American territory. But again, we don't have much of a military, so we can't really defend what is rightly ours. Spain also will encourage Native Americans to attack settlers that are part of the western portion of those southern states. So again, any American settlers heading west could face harassment from those Native Americans. So this map kind of shows you that even though the country of America has greatly expanded, we are really surrounded by a very uncomfortable situation with the British throughout Canada and Spain really controlling a good chunk of modern-day America. And so that green and yellow, the striped section that was supposed to be American territory, but this is the area that supposedly Spain controls. So we don't have the military to truly force the Spanish out of there, so we're going to have to kind of take a wait-and-see approach. A few more here. France is going to demand repayment of war debt practically immediately. Now, of course, we now know that King Louis was in a bad way financially, and of course helping us with the war is not helping that situation, so he needs the money as quickly as possible, but we don't have the money to pay him back. And it doesn't help the fact they're not allowing American merchants to trade in the French-controlled the Caribbean islands. Now, again, we are going to have difficulty trading with anybody if we don't have access to either the British or the French islands. And to add insult to injury, we are also being attacked by pirates throughout North Africa. They were attacking U.S. ships that were trading throughout the Mediterranean, and they were also taking our sailors and forcing them into slavery. Now, prior to this, we had the British Navy always protecting us as colonies, so we never had to worry about these pirates. But now that the pirates are taking our ships, they will either expect us to outright fight them and don't have much of a navy, or to pay a yearly bribe, and of course we don't have that either. So two big events are going to form, and that will lead us to a breaking point, so to speak. Again, one of it has to do with trade. States are constantly arguing over interstate trade in terms of how much they're taxing each other, and that is really holding us back right from economically succeeding. So Virginia is going to call a convention in order to really discuss this issue. They were hoping that all 13 states would show, but only 5 showed, which is pretty much an insult. But the 5 that are there do agree to have another meeting, and that meeting will take place a year later, and that will be called the Constitutional Convention. Now, at the same time that this is going on, Shays' Rebellion is also happening throughout upstate Massachusetts. Daniel Shay and hundreds of other farmers are truly demanding that the state change the debtor laws and also ease the foreclosure rules. What they mean is that as a farmer, if you owed a debt, you either had to pay off that debt on your land or you could possibly go to debtor prison. So they felt that was very unfair because so many of these men had fought honorably, including Daniel Shay, in the American Revolution. And some states had eased those foreclosure rules, but not the state of Massachusetts. So they decided to take matters in their own hands, as well as maybe they were also encouraged by what had happened prior to the American Revolution about staging a revolt. And so they will attempt to get really the whole country's attention by having this rebellion. But the rebellion is going to be stopped by a militia that is going to be hired by the Massachusetts governor. And they will kill a few of Shay's men, but more or less kind of scare everybody and force them to go home. But really the lesson here is going to be on the upper class, is that if we don't do something, that this new nation is not going to survive what they call the mobocracy. Can the everyday person truly control this government? And that was also disconcerting to them. So it's these two events together that will lead us to the Constitutional Convention. So I hope this helped. Hope this is going to give you a bit of an overview for your essay. Now remember that you are not expected to have to write about all of these topics on the essay, but pick some. I would pick something from each of the categories to be comfortable with, but be able to write comfortably on at least 2 or 3 of the big ideas. All right, thank you.